People look at me strange when I tell them that I have an 18-year-old son. I'm 33. When James and I go out, it isn't uncommon for people to ask if he is my little brother. He could easily pass for being in his 20s, and so could I. The past 18 years haven't been without their trials, but I like to think I did the best I could given the situation. During my freshman year of high school, I knocked up my girlfriend. Her parents were going to put the baby up for adoption, but my mom stepped in and helped me get custody. My son is a straight-A student. He is a point guard for the school basketball team. I scrounged together enough money to get him a halfway decent car. He's popular in all the ways I wasn't. By the time I was his age, I had a 2-year-old son, a GED, and a job at the local Pella factory. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment duplex a few blocks from his high school. He does his homework without much prompting and spends his downtime with friends or in the living room kicking my ass at Call of Duty. At one point, I thought he might be gay. I wouldn't have cared, but I thought it was weird that a boy his age had never had a girlfriend. I asked him about it, and he smiled, saying, "No, Dad, I'm not gay. I just want to wait until I'm a little older to get out there. Wouldn't want you to be a grandfather in your 30s. That was our sex talk. Between the internet and the sex ed class I had to sign a permission slip for, I figured he knew the basics. A few months ago, he told me he was going to out late. When I asked why, he told me that he had a date. I didn't ask any questions. I slipped him a $100 bill and told him to be home in time for breakfast. He was a good kid. I trusted him. After that, it became a semi-regular thing. He'd let me know on Friday afternoon that he was going to be out late that night. Each Saturday morning, he'd be home and sitting on the couch playing on the Xbox before I climbed out of bed. I never met any of his dates, but I figured he was keeping it to himself. Like I said, I trusted my son. He had a good head on his shoulders, and I had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. I don't normally watch the news. Between my Facebook feed and Twitter, I usually knew enough about current events not to care. For whatever reason, I found myself sitting in front of the television at 5 in the afternoon and decided to watch the news. I kinda wish I hadn't. The television switched from a commercial to showing the anchor sitting there with a somber face. She looked at the camera and said, "Later tonight we'll cover a developing story. Several area women are still missing as police look for clues as to whether or not the disappearances might be related. We lived in a sleepy little town. The idea that something like that could be happening so close to home shook me a little. The idea that my son could be out and about with something like that happening in town scared me a little too much. I talked to him about it. He told me not to worry. James was a big kid. He stood just under 7 feet tall and had a wide frame. I wasn't worried about someone getting the jump on him. But as a big guy myself, I knew that having a large frame meant very little if someone else had a gun. James assured me that I had nothing to worry about. Just to be safe, I swiped his cell phone while he was asleep. I installed an app that allowed me to see his location at all times. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I remembered being 17 and thinking that I was invincible. I didn't give it much thought. After setting the app to hidden mode, I put it back on the charger in the kitchen and didn't pay it much mind after that. I figured if I ever got worried while he was out, I could pull up an app on my phone and see his location. As long as it wasn't too out of sorts, I'd relax and go back to watching Netflix. I started following the case of the missing women online. It was developing into a bit of a media sensation in our area. 6 women had gone missing over the course of 10 weeks. They varied in age and appearance. No bodies had been recovered, but police were operating under the assumption that foul play might be involved. When the 7th woman went missing, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen Rochelle in 10 years. She came back around when James was about 7. She tried to do the mother thing but didn't have the chops for it. After a few months of broken promises and missed appointments I filed a motion for the court to do a drug test, After she failed the test, I had my lawyer file another motion, stripping her of any visitation with our son. I didn't want my son to have to deal with that. It was Saturday morning, and I was very apprehensive about going downstairs. James and I didn't talk about his mother very much. She had spiraled out of control after giving birth to him and used just about any drug she could trade her body for. By the time she had come around to visit him, she had aged 20 years and only 7. Her arms were covered in track marks, and her teeth were yellowed to the point of decay. To be honest, I was surprised she stayed alive long enough to be abducted. With a heavy heart, I approached my son in the living room and said, "Son, we need to talk about your mother." James sighs and paused his game. He looked up at me and said, "What did she do this time?" I sighs and said, "She went missing last night. Police say there were signs of a struggle at her trailer." James stared at the television like he was looking through it and unpaused his game. He continued looking forward as he said, "Yeah, well, that really isn't news, is it?" James and I didn't talk about his mother because he didn't like talking about her. One of the main reasons I involved a lawyer was because during one of her visits, she picked him up and took him over to her apartment. Apparently, she had a few customers come by while my son sat on the couch. His first real visit with his mother turned into junkies sitting next to him on the couch as they plowed $20 a pop to nail his mother. 3 hours later, a guy James called Steven dropped him off at the house. He was there when I got off work. I asked him what happened, and all we would say is that his mother didn't want him there anymore. He had sat outside without a jacket for 4 hours. Of all the things that could have happened to him, I was relieved more than anything that it had been so minor. I'd heard horror stories about situations like that which ended in much more gruesome outcomes. I immediately put James into therapy after that. Within a few years, his affect returned to normal, and the visits to the therapist became less frequent. Up until that night, he had asked me about his mother about once every couple of months. In the time since, I think he might have brought her up once. The following week, he let me know he was going out on another date. My penned-up worry manifested that night in pulling up an app on my phone. He drove to a random address on the other side of town and then out to a spot in the middle of nowhere. I installed the week several weeks prior and didn't give it much thought. However, I hadn't been aware that it had been tracking his movements. According to the logs, he had been to that location in the middle of nowhere at least 4 times in the previous 6 weeks. I looked over his stops and his routes and noticed that one of the places he had been was Rochelle's trailer the night she went missing. I was suspicious, but unwilling to grasp what every cell in my brain would have been shouting out to me if it was any other kid. I threw my phone onto my bed and pulled a bottle of whiskey from my nightstand. I drank myself to sleep and woke groggy the next morning. James was downstairs playing Dark Souls and eating a Pop-Tart. I knocked back a Red Bull and stumbled out to my car. I had decided to go out to that spot in the middle of nowhere and check out where my son had been taking his dates. I really wish I hadn't. I really wish I hadn't. My GPS led me to a gravel road that had fallen into disrepair. After driving down it for about a quarter of a mile, with dense forest on either side, it opened up to a clearing with a small pond. I pulled up at the edge of the gravel and got out of my car. I could see remnants of a campfire near the pond. I walked over to it. The ashes were still warm. I sighed with relief. My son had found a quiet field with a pond in the middle of nowhere and was swooning his dates under the stars. I was almost proud of him, and then I noticed the footprints leading toward the pond. It looked like someone had dragged something heavy to the edge of the water. I walked closer to the edge of the water and stared into the murky water. I turned back towards the fire pit and noticed bloodstains on the grass behind me. With some trepidation, I waded into the water, and about 10 feet out, my worst fears were confirmed. I stepped on something hard. I reached down to feel what it was, and it was a thick logging chain. I pulled on it to reveal a waterlogged body wrapped in a blanket. I pulled away the cloth to reveal a bloated face. It was Rochelle. I quickly wrapped her body back up and pushed it under the water. I ran back to my car and sped home. I sat in the driveway for 15 minutes trying to figure out if I was having a panic attack or a heart attack. My heart pounded in my chest so hard that it hurt. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to rationalize what I had found. I tried to convince myself of 50 different conspiracy theories that explained why my son was innocent. Someone knocked on the driver's side window of my car, and I about jumped out of my skin. It was James. I climbed out of the car hesitantly, and he immediately wrapped his arms around me, saying, "Whatever it is, it's okay, Dad. Just tell me what happened." He was such a good son. For a brief moment, I forgot about the pond and his mother's body. I followed him inside, and after changing into some dry clothes, I joined him in the living room. I sat in my easy chair as he sat across from me on the couch. After a few minutes of silence, I stared at the floor and said, "I found your mother." He responded, "Oh." I don't know what I expected him to say, but his response hit me hard. It wasn't surprise or even anger. It was that same flat affect he showed on the rare occasions I had caught him doing something he wasn't supposed to do. I looked right at him and said, "Please tell me you didn't do anything stupid, son." He looked off to the side and said, "Define stupid." I raised my voice a little. "God damn it, James, did you kill your mother?" He laughed and said, "The bitch was dead a long time before I clocked her over the head and dragged her to my car. Any bitch that would try to sell her son for dope has been dead for a long time." I couldn't speak. I had always wondered about that night, but James never talked about it. James continued, "You know, really, I lucked out. The bastard that paid for me gave me a ride home and told me never to go back to my mother. I guess it could have been a lot worse, but really that was the day I snapped. I understood how meaningless life really was. Of course I killed her. That bitch deserved to die 6 times over." Tears filled my eyes as my son confessed to more than 15 murders. I sat there dumbfounded as he gave details and descriptions that no child his age should have been able to produce. When he finished telling me everything, I just sat there. What could I say? What should I have said? My son confessed to being a serial killer, and the only thought going through my head was trying to figure out how to make sure it didn't ruin his life. I finally worked up the nerve to say, "We need to get you help, son." "This isn't healthy," James cut me off. "No therapists are going to help me, Dad. You've been good to me, so I'll spare you the bullshit. We both know that I turn 18 in about a month. I'll be out of your hair. Besides, I have bigger plans." I stared at my son and tried to wrap my mind around the beautiful monster he had become. 17 years of being his parent, and I had never in a million years imagined that he would turn out so broken. I quit my job about a week later. By his 18th birthday, I had burned through most of my savings drinking and trying to forget what I had learned. Sure enough, the day after his 18th birthday, he was gone. Any part of me that held hope for him was lost a few weeks later, when police discovered the bodies in the pond. By that point, he was long gone. I received a postcard a few weeks ago. It was a picture of a sandy beach. On the back were the words, "Hey Dad, just letting you know I'm fine." I tossed it on the table next to the door and went back to drinking. Part of me wants to go to the police and tell them everything. It probably wouldn't be that hard to track him down. Still, he's my son. I'm willing to do plenty of things, but serving my son up for crimes that would land him on death row sits outside my level of civic duty. The guilt gets a little worse each day. For now, all I can do is hope that he really is fine. I have no idea where he is. I don't want to know. All I can do is hope that he's stopped killing. He really was a good boy. He's tall and charismatic. I'm sure he'd make it big if he just tried. And that's how it ends. A father who chose silence over justice, love over truth. But this isn't the only story of someone who appeared ordinary, until the darkness came through. Hi everyone. I served a 10-year prison sentence between 2001 and 2011, and possibly I met a man who could be considered the world's most unknown serial killer. It was back in 2011, when I had about 6 months left on my sentence, and I won't disclose his name, for obvious reasons. But we shared a cell for those last 6 months. He was in for fraud, a 3-year stretch. It might have been more, can't remember. He was in his late 50s and, to put things simply, didn't look like any con. Skinny, glasses, and always reading a book. At yard time, he would always be playing chess, and I heard he never lost a game in all the time he was there. Anyway, I didn't really speak to him much at the start. But after I told him I was getting out and was struggling with some paperwork, not the best, at writing, he helped me out. I was grateful, and afterwards we became more friendly. But it was the night before my release that he told me his own story. I'd got hold of some moonshine and we started drinking and swapping stories like you do in prison. Mostly bravado and bigging yourself up. Well, I must admit we got pretty drunk, and that was when he told me his story. Now, at the time, like you reading this, I thought it was all bullshit. We were drunk and I didn't believe a word. Just thought it was a deranged man rambling. But once I had got out, well, let me tell you his story first and what I found out afterwards. He confessed that night that between 1970 and 2010, he'd killed 155 people. He told me he killed his first victim when he was 23, but knew it was what he wanted to do for the rest of his life by the time he turned 15. Just said it was a calling, like that of a priesthood. He said he found his particular specialty were roads, mainly motorways. He'd wait in the rest stops in the dark, waiting for someone to pull in. Drunks were his particular favorite, the easiest of kills, like taking candy from a baby. They'd be snoring in the front seat in the rest stop, trying to snooze off their 10 beers before they got caught by the police. And he said he'd watch them while they slept, their heads pressed back against the headrest, mouths open as they rested. He told me it became too easy, driving across the country, waiting for drunks. It got boring, so he graduated to couples. His favorite were university couples, young sweet things with the whole life ahead of them. It gave him an incredible buzz to take a life with so much potential. They'd drive out to a nearby highway rest stop to make love, and in the darkness, he'd watch them before getting to work. Afterwards, he told me he used to videotape the news report, which always showed the pretty young blonde smiling at him from the TV. Then they would show the vigils, candles in the hands of those who were thankful it wasn't them. A crying parent, a teacher who barely knew the student was speaking about their potential greatness, a potential that would never come to be. He used to categorize the news reports and play his favorites at night, like how you would put on a movie. He'd sit down with pizza and wine and watch those news reports, reminiscing about different victims over the years. Now, of course, I didn't believe a word of it. Who would have? We were drunk, and by the time he had finished, I felt pretty sick about it all. Of course, I wanted to smash his face in, but I couldn't. I was getting out in the morning, and he knew that. And later on, I guess that's why he told me. He was teasing me. Well, anyway, it was the last part he told me that made me wonder. There was a girl murdered in the 90s called Alicia. I won't reveal her full name, but you can Google it and it will come up the article. Everyone knew that case. It was a big story in my country, but that night he told me it was him that committed the murder. Asked me if I wanted to know where the body was buried. I told him he was a sick, but he told me the location anyway. You should have seen the smile on his face. It was like all this time he had been playing a game with me, waiting for the night I got out to tell me, test me, sort of. In the morning, he only stared at me blankly as I left my cell. And let me tell you, I'd been around murderers and gangsters all my life, but that look on his face was something else. I can still picture it sometimes when I close my eyes, those cold, dark eyes. And then for the next 6 months after my release, I thought about what he had told me about that famous killing, the location of that poor girl. I would even find myself in the middle of the night trying to find more information about the case, cross-checking what that man had said. It came to the point where I started suffering from deep anxiety about it all. Of course, I would never go to the police since I'm old school, but I don't know, it sometimes gets to me. I reckon he was just lying, but I thought I'd get the story off my chest. Thank you for reading, and God bless.
Well,
Thank you for watching until the end. See you all next time.